I think I first heard the term software gardener from Peter Kofler, but I'm not sure if he was the first to come up with it. Some people say we are craftspeople, some say no, we are engineers. Hi, my name is David, and in this series I'm talking about software development while I'm working on my bonsai trees and on my pre-bonsai. And today I want to talk about metaphors for software development. But before we get into it, let's talk about this tree a little bit. It's a weeping willow that is in a very early stage of development. I grew it from a cutting last year, and right now I'm just trying to thicken the trunk, which basically means letting it grow and then letting it grow more. That's why it looks so messy. But on the other hand, here on the top, it should be thin, because we want taper in the trunk. We want a thick trunk at the bottom and a very thin trunk at the top. And the same for the primary branches. The primary branches at the bottom should be thicker than the ones at the top. Here at the top, we have a branch that is probably already thick enough. So I want to limit the growth here to not thicken this branch anymore. To do that, I will remove a little bit of foliage. Why did this make me think about metaphors for software development? Because sometimes software just seems to grow. I'm fully aware that software doesn't grow by itself. It only changes when we change something. But still, sometimes it just seems to grow out of hand, like this tree, and then we have to do something. And just like trees, we cannot completely predict where the software is going. For example, this is a weeping willow, and it has the bad habit of just letting branches die for no apparent reason. I had a really nice trunk extension here that would have given the tree more balance, but this branch did not survive the winter. So all my plans I had last year for this tree, I had to revisit because I cannot grow the tree in the way I thought last year. So with this tree, it is crucial to work in an iterative and incremental manner. I make a change and then I wait for the feedback of the tree to see how the tree did respond to my change, and only then I can change my plans, adapt my plans, and make the next change. And with software, we have a similar thing. We don't fully know how a feature will work when we start to implement it. We don't fully know what our customers need until we show them software, until we watch them use our software. Because we are usually inventing new things, and when you invent new things, you don't really know everything beforehand. And the more you learn, the better you can plan, and that's why it's important to use an iterative and incremental process. So, is software a little bit like gardening? Yes, but if you look closely, this metaphor breaks down pretty quickly. Here with the gardening metaphor, I said I will remove some of the branches here to stop this branch from thickening, and I will keep the branches here and let them grow so that this branch catches up in thickness. I will also leave most of the growth below to thicken everything below this line. So what about software engineering? I remember a time when the term software engineering meant people who don't really know how software should be created. It was synonymous with a very rigid, very plan-driven approach to software development that did not work except for the most simple projects you could imagine. That's when software engineering got a bad reputation. But now there's a comeback of the term software engineering with what Dave Farley and others call modern software engineering. So how did we get there? The problem with the engineering metaphor, how we used it back 20 or 30 years ago, was that I think we borrowed the wrong metaphors from engineering. When you're building a bridge, as soon as you start pouring concrete, you have to have a pretty good plan what you want to do and when you want to do it. So you will use a very plan-driven approach when building a bridge. But this is building the final product. While you're designing the bridge, you will use a more scientific approach with iteration, with experiments, with calculations. You will probe the ground and work in a very different way than while building the final product. And with most engineering projects, building the final product is more expensive and more resource intensive than designing the product. and that's probably why we borrowed the metaphor of building the bridge instead of designing the bridge when we first started talking about software engineering. And this meant a very rigid, plan-driven approach that could not work for something as fungible as software. That's when people said we need a more agile approach, and when people said software is more like a craft, where you try to do your best work and where you learn from your mistakes and where you teach others to not make your mistakes again. So is crafting the correct metaphor? Are we craftspeople? Probably not, because we should use engineering methods, just the right ones. But we can also borrow a lot of good things from how crafts work. What do I mean with the right engineering methods? Well, we need to use the methods that engineers use when planning. Because in software, there is no difference between the plan and the final product. The plan is the final product. The source code that we write is both the plan and the product. And that's where the engineering metaphor breaks down. The gardening metaphor breaks down where software doesn't grow on itself. It only grows when we change it, but then it sometimes grows organically, and that's why we have to watch, to learn, to wait for feedback. And the craftsmanship or crafting metaphor breaks down where we should use a more rigorous process and other tools than craftspeople usually use. But all of those metaphors can be useful. So what do you think? Which metaphor works best for you? Or do you use a completely different metaphor when you're talking about software development? Please tell me in the comments, and I'll see you next time with this tree or a different tree.